Welcome into the Inside Bassmaster Podcast, episode 131. It is the Pattern of the Month segment, Kyle. And we have got our guest, our guy, Justin Atkins, join us today for the month of June. And Kyle, we picked Justin out for a variety of reasons. He was, for one, available in the time frame that we needed. And also, he is one of the best offshore anglers for largemouth that we have in the Elite Series. And I guess we could say smallmouth too, based on his smallmouth swing. But this is the time of the year where the offshore guys start to really thrive. So we had to have Justin come on and talk about it with us.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, obviously, all year long, we've seen tournaments get won pre-spawn, spawn, a little bit of shad spawn, fish still shallow. Get to the month of June, obviously, a lot of places the fish start getting off the bank. So certainly looking forward to talking to Justin about that. And then obviously, still some fish to be caught shallow, things to talk about there. But Justin, welcome to the pattern of the month. How are we doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having us.
So, Justin, the first thing I'm going to talk about is all of those college events that we used to fish back in the day. They might have been late May, early June, or we'd fish on the TVA and it would be late July, like schools beat up. Those fish are swimming away from baits because they're so scared. So, from your perspective, how fun is it when those first few post-spawn fish start to get out on the ledges and form up in schools? It's some of probably the craziest and best fishing an angler can ever see offshore, especially on these pressured largemouth lakes down south.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I mean, dream season is like first fish that get out on a Tuesday and you're off work and you get to find them. They're really hungry. They're aggressive. You can catch them winding catch a lot of them on a 25.5 dredger, catch them on a swim bait. If you want to slow down drag a worm, you can. But like those first ones, that's when you can really catch them winding that plug.
Justin, when it comes to offshore fishing, one thing that I think, it gets talked about a lot, but, for somebody that's not familiar with offshore fishing, and it can be TVA, ledge fishing, it can be highland reservoir fishing offshore, things like that. Seems like a lot of the work and preparation goes in before your boat ever even hits the water. You're looking at maps, trying to find locations that look like they would hold fish. Kind of walk us through your process of what you're doing before you ever even get to the lake, trying to locate, potential offshore locations.
So, first thing you're going to need to do is just have an understanding of the body of water that you're going to be fishing. Is it current driven or is it non-current driven? Fish get off the bank all across the country, but there's two different things that you're going to want to look for. If it is a river system, it doesn't have to be the TVA. I fish like this on the Coosa. When I won the Open, I was using this very same little formula, and if it's not going to be current driven, you're going to want to look for more hard objects. So we'll start off with like a current driven deal. So say Pickwick, anywhere on the coast, so just any kind of river chain or anything that's going to be going to have some current flow in it. You're going to want to look for places where that current's going to hit directly. And so basically what happens is if you're ever fishing, in a river, on a bluff, or somewhere it makes turn and it's got current hitting it, you'll notice that in front of the bluff or the hard object that current's hitting, it's going to create a void right there in front of it. Well, the same thing happens off the bank. And that void allows those fish to just sit there and not fight the current all day while it's washing bait to them. And at that point, so when you know that it is going to be a current-driven lake, it's somewhere that it has that potential to set up, you're just going to look for any kind of object, any kind of contour line that's going to basically perpendicular the way the current's going to flow. And at that point, I'll just go down through there and highlight all these places that I feel like set up to potentially have, a current-driven feeding spot set up on them. And then when I start practice, I put my boat in, I'm going to go straight to idling. And I'm not going to waste a lot of time just looking on real long, straight, nothing contour lines, none of that. Like I'm going to be looking for specific places that I'm going to run from one to the next, to the next, to the next. It's going to be those high percentage places that I feel like could possibly have bass. You hardly ever find them on just something straight. Now, you might have a high spot that is on a straight ledge. So say like your contour line shows it being straight out here on the hard break, but up on top, it may have a little dip or a little rise, and you'll have some fish get on that. But as far as it just being 15 foot forever straight into the current with, just a vertical drop, like it's a waste of time. And so I'm gonna just take my efforts at that point and try to speed that process up. Fast forward, let's say you go somewhere like a Sam Rayburn and I understand, like if they get a big rain out there, Rayburn gets up a little bit. It can be a little current driven, but 99% of the time it's not. You're going to look for fish on things off the bank. And my two favorite deals to look for, it's going to be brush piles number one, stumps number two. And really the best way to approach that is I'm going to just start looking for them in an obvious spot. So on a point. Would be the number one thing I'm going to just immediately go to. And for two reasons. The first reason is going to be I can idle the point. I'm sure there's going to be a brush pile on it, probably going to be in multiple depths, and good chance it's going to have fish on it. So let's say I mark a brush pile that's 25 foot and 15 foot on a point. I don't see any in the 15-foot one, but I get some bites out of the 25 or vice versa. That's going to help me in a 3-day time period to know to look more, maybe deeper. You know what I mean? Like I almost look out there for some of those deeper piles. And if I'm getting more bites or seeing more fish in the 25-foot ones, I'm going to dial in that that's the depth zone I'm looking in. And I'm going to look in more non-obvious places. So on a straight bank, on just a random flat, that's going to be in that depth zone that I'm looking for. And I also don't pass anything. Like if I see a big stump out there and you don't want, I mean, you can catch some off a little one, but like if it's a big stump, roots are washed out, you can see it's got a lot going around, the bottom of it. I'm always going to mark that. That's things that you can catch a single fish off of that more than likely you'll be the only one throwing at.
And then Ronnie, if you don't mind me asking
Yeah.
one more part of that question, when you get to the lake or river, whatever it may be, and you start graphing, what's just your general graph orientation? Like you got a side scan going, you got your maps going. Like what is your graph looking like as far as that goes for somebody that may not be super familiar with offshore graph?
No, so on my I run two Lowrance HDS 12 lives. My left one I'll have a C map for most of the screen, and then I'll have a sliver of 2D. Just for general purposes. I don't know. That's the way I've always done it. I don't find myself looking at the 2D just all the time, but that will show you bottom hardness and other things like that. If you're really trying to get familiar with an area, it's always good to have it. And then on the right, I'll have it split up to where if I'm really wanting to run my zone out really wide, I'll 3-pane my left unit. So I'll have map 2D and down on it, and then just all side on the right one. But for the most part, I'll just run a big map, a little bit of 2D, and then a little bit of down, and the rest of it side scan on the right unit. I always run the side scan and everything on my right unit because a lot of times you're touching either what you believe is a school of fish or the object, such as a brush pile. You're touching it. I'm right-handed, and so that just allows me to use my right hand to make the waypoints. And that's just my personal preference. I don't like having to reach over because then you're trying to use your thumb or whatever, or you're doing it left-handed. I can't do anything left-handed, so that would be my general setup.
You don't have a third graph where you have an active target out the side of the boat as you're running down the lake, just seeing if they're like marking every fish in the lake. I mean, I heard that it's just the perfect end all be all.
Ronnie, there's some things you just can't talk about.
I knew I was going to get you in trouble there. So Justin, something I learned a lot on the TVA, Pickwick. I mean, I grew up on Lake Norman, but Pickwick is by far my favorite lake. We spent so many years in college fishing that lake, and I loved fishing it shallow. I learned to fish offshore on that lake. One thing that I've noticed and learned, and we saw it in the Elite Series event that Brandon Lester won last year, first week of June or so, the mid, June 4th through the 8th, whatever it might have been, that we tend to think that these fish will go from the spawn to mid depth to 20 foot to 25 foot, and they just get deeper throughout the year. But I felt like I learned on the TVA sometimes that once they go from spawning, that they almost go out as deep as they'll probably get for the year. And then as the summer works on, that they might get shallower. He caught him in a shallower spot. Have you seen that? Is that a seasonal thing, certain times of the year, certain years, or is that like a rule of thumb where you'll be up on the bank sight fishing and the next week you may be out deeper boat positioning than you will be maybe possibly the rest of the year?
A lot of that has to do with current that's being pulled. So I'll be honest with you, I'm really surprised that Lester had that place last for 4 days. Where he caught them is not a surprise to me. They're about 75 yards off where they normally get. It's the same place Greg Hackney won off of a few years ago. I looked for him. Greg looked for him. Buddy looked for him. Brandon just happened to be the one that decided to go to the right instead of running out off the end of it, and he found them. What causes those fish to get on those shallower places like that, those current that's being driven. I actually found one that week that I'd never seen before. I thought it had the potential to be a winning hole. The first day I caught like whatever, I had 18 something and lost like a 6 or 7 pounder off of it. But they dropped the current back a little bit, and it was going from running 80,000 only running about 40, and I never caught another bass there the rest of the week. They just never showed back up. And I was hoping, I mean, not that I didn't want Brandon to win, I just knew what he had. And I was like, I'm hoping that when they cut it back to 40, that's going to mess those fish up, and they're not going to want to position there every day for the rest of this tournament, but they did. So, but to answer your question, so that same phenomenon happens on the north end of Pickwick. It happens in New Johnsonville, on Kentucky Lake, where those fish are in those like 7 to 10 foot ranges, 6 to 10. And basically it's just because that's what's given to them. So there's several places they get on like that. But the majority of the river up there, other than just the straight river channel, where, I mean, it's, it just goes out there and falls off and it's in the actual river channel, comes up, it's just flats. And they have very subtle drops and changes and hard places out there on them. And so those fish, unless they're going to just go sit out in the middle of the 30-foot river channel, they have to set up shallow if they're going to school up, if they're going to get on feeding places. But more current definitely helps them set up better shallow. And so, like I said, and a lot of times at the beginning of that practice, we had 80 to 100,000 being pulled every day. I was like, this tournament's going to get dominated in less than 10 foot of water. As the tournament progressed, the first day we had that current, they cut it off that night. Brandon's spot held out, and I kind of had to rotate from wanting to fish all these shallow places to fishing relative hard spots and community holes,
and some
which
brush
would be your
and some
20,
trees or whatever.
25,
Yeah.
and some brush. Correct. I was having to fish those 20, 25 foot deep schools that you can scan and everybody was seeing. So, to answer your question though, yes, for the most part, when they first get out, I find them as deep as I'm going to find them all year. I don't know if that water's cooler. It makes them more comfortable. They heal faster from the spawn. I don't know what it is, but you find them out there on some of those deepest places. You're going to find them all year as early as they get out there.
I just wanted to make sure this tournament we're talking about at Pickwick was the same tournament you got mad at me and Ronnie for trying to make sure your track was accurate.
Yeah, that's right. That tournament.
Sure, it's the same tournament.
Hey, I had Clark
I
Windler,
wasn't that off.
Sabine call me out about, he said, I'm going to be low. I don't care what Ronnie Moore says, as we're on Fox Sports 1. He's like, I'm going to be low by 2 pounds. I texted him. I said, I'll make you heavy by 3 pounds on Championship Sunday just to mess with you. And he said, don't do it. Patty will kill me.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, I was closer that day than Patrick ever is. So, I don't know what the problem was.
Well, okay, so getting the train back on the tracks here. Obviously, offshore fishing in general, you hear a lot about rotating baits. It's not a matter of like, you can go down a stretch of shore grass and you can throw a swim jig the whole time. Like if you're fishing offshore, almost always you're going to have a rotation of baits and, start with something more aggressive and then obviously tone it back, as you go. So typically these pattern of the months, we always talk about like, give me your top 3 baits for offshore fishing. I feel like 3 is pretty narrow. Like it would be hard to narrow down to just 3, but like, give me your top 5 offshore baits that you're going to keep on the deck pretty much anywhere you're, fishing offshore in the month of June.
Yeah. So, I mean, 3 wouldn't be hard to do, but we could do 5. So a Berkeley power worm, a Berkeley hollow belly, a 25.5 dredger. I like a mop jig and a spoon. And you could trade the mop jig out, honestly, for a hair jig. If you wanted to, whichever way you want to go. I've caught big ones on both. Honestly, let's just say I'm going to be fishing 15 foot or deeper, I'm going to do a mop jig. If they're 15 foot and shallower, I'm going to throw a hair jig. Like, that's that zone that I feel like that thing really shines in. Sometimes when they get real deep, it gets hard to fish it properly, because basically you want that bait to just be gliding and getting a little bit deeper. Well, when they're so deep, you have to just let it fall. When you engage your reel, it wants to just swim straight back up because you have such a, angle on them that it just doesn't seem to work as good. And so, like, when they're shallower than 15 foot, that's when I'm going to throw that hair jig. But basically, that's going to be my 5 baits. And I'm going to play with how I want to start my rotation. So, if the fish are super aggressive, they just getting out there, I'm pulling up, I'm throwing the plug every time, first cast. And once they cool off, then I'll rotate into a swim bait, a jig, worm, and then the spoon's going to be my last one. If they are not very aggressive, they've been out there for a little while, they've been getting messed with, I'm going to start out swim bait or worm or mop jig and rotate through a few of those until, like, if I start firing it out there and they're getting it before it gets on the bottom, or as soon as it's getting on the bottom, I don't even have to move it once getting on it. At that point, I may speed the process up, fire the crankbait out there, fire the spoon out there. And so you really just kind of have to let the fish tell you, and every spot can be different because different places are going to get more or less pressure. But honestly, and it's also a time of day, how much water's being pulled. They turn the water on, the fish may get more aggressive. You just really kind of have to let them tell you. It's literally like sight fishing. There's no perfect science for, okay, you're just going to pull up and you're just going to throw this, and then you're going to throw this, and then you're going to throw this. Like, you really, if you're going to be effective with it, you need to have all the tools available and let the fish tell you how they want them.
Current's the big deal, especially on the TVA. But otherwise, time of day, low light conditions, those things can matter too. Have you seen a big difference in the mornings, like a morning overcast bite, in the summer on an offshore bar or ledge without current running versus, middle of the day, the current's running and it's sunny? Like, do those fish position differently? Most of the time, if it's cloudy, they might get up off the bottom, or maybe they're right on it, dotted like they're supposed to be.
Yeah, it can really just spread them out. So if you don't have any current and it's still low light, um, so I'm really gonna get deep here on y'all for just a second, and I'm sure somebody's watching this podcast like, he's so dumb, this ain't real, blah blah blah. Those fish don't live out there. They do not stay out there all night. You can fish down the bank on a June day in Pickwick all day and never get a bite, and 30 minutes after dark, catch one, catch another, and they'll be right on the bank. And you can get on a deep hole at the crack of dawn and scan it, and there won't be a fish out there. You can scan wherever you want to. You give the sun 20 minutes of being up, and you'll be throwing a worm out there, and all of a sudden, you'll catch one. And then you'll make 10 casts, you'll catch another, and then it'll be the next cast, and then the next. And you go scan it, and there's 1,000 of them out there. They came from somewhere. And it's no different than catching them on the bank at night. They came from somewhere. If they were up there all day, you catch one every now and then. If they stayed out there on them deep holes, you could sit out there and catch them all night, but they're not there. So what happens on cloudy days, to answer your question, I feel like it prolongs them getting out there, and they don't initially go right to the spot. So there's not much current. It's cloudy. It's overcast. You'll catch them just fan casting. Like they'll just be out there roaming.
We saw that day one at Pickwick last year. They were just 3 guys all casting around, not on a spot. They're just throwing around.
They're throwing around. That's right. Because those fish will get out there. They know that zone they're going to get in for the day. They know that, we call it B tree. They know they're headed out to the B tree hole, but they have no reason to get right on that initial spot where that current's going to be hitting. As the day progresses, sun gets up, water starts running, whatever phenomenon's going to happen to make them get there that day, they slide up, and then they'll start getting more knotted up. So, and the thing about the whole fish traveling if you look at it and you're sitting out there off the bank, you're 300 yards off the bank. Well, how long does it take you to walk that far? 5 minutes? Like it's not a big deal for that fish to travel like that. And
especially when there's nothing in between.
like
there's no like checkpoint. There's no lemonade stand on the way. Like they're going here or they're here.
That's right. And I don't think the same fish sit on the same hole all day long. I don't think the same fish get on the same hole day after day. I think he goes up to the bank, roams the bank, feeds at night, does whatever bass do. And then naturally his instincts, whatever makes him get out there and set up on those places, whatever makes him sense those places out, that takes over. He gets on the next spot down the river that's a great, ambush point. He ends up out there with his next 30 best friends for the day, and they hang out for a little while. And so, you just see times when guys just sat on a hole all day and just caught big one after big one after big one. I don't think those same fish have just been sitting there all day. Like, I think fresh ones pull up throughout the day. He was over here on the stump. He decided he's ready to feed. He eases up here to the island head. Hey, there's a power worm. Geek, in the live well he goes. So I just think that there's a big misconception that these 30 bass live on this point from May the 1st to September 29th. And that is not true, because if it was, as much pressure as they get, they would all have holes in their mouth. They would all be jerked, and taken to Florence or Counts or New Johnsonville or wherever the tournament is. And they'd all be gone by the 3rd week of May. There wouldn't be one to fish for anymore. So I think there's a lot more moving and shaking that goes on.
There might have only been 7 bass by Waterloo at certain points.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think there's a lot of movement that goes on that people don't account for. Like, you could have a 15-pound hole one day. That doesn't mean it's not capable of catching 20. And just because you caught 20 there in practice, don't mean it's going to be 20 on Thursday. So just, that's always things to keep in mind. Have different rotations of holes and, keep them all honest.
So I take it you're a big proponent of Bass Live going back to tracking fish like they did back in the
Dude, that'd be so cool.
Be awesome. I think it'd be awesome. And I think if you marked one on the Tennessee River in the summertime and watched where he moved, as long as it wasn't in a live well, I think it would be impressive how much he actually roamed around during the day.
That would be crazy if we didn't realize he got caught and we're like, dude, he's in Yellow Creek, he's in Cogers. Holy, I don't even know. He's just been swimming all day. Justin, I do have a question for you. So this wasn't June. I know we're talking June pattern of the months, but we're also talking ledge fishing. I was in that college event, the wild card, where the Magnum spoon made its debut. You were in that. I think you got 3rd or 2nd, and then you had a UNA team. Yeah, and then UNA team was there in the top 3, and then obviously Bethel, Dalton, and I forget who Dalton's partner was at the moment. Maybe Zach Parker. I think it was Zach Parker and Dalton just busted them on the mag spoon. Will there be, or since that time, has there been a bait that has been introduced to the ledges that has made, like it's not a phenomenon as much now because the mag spoon's in everyone's rotation, but I just remember I got like 19th in that event. And I was not even in the tournament because I didn't have something that the guys at the top did. And I knew that I wasn't no shot I could win with traditional stuff because they had never seen that mag spoon.
Yeah, no. I mean, honestly, there hasn't. That honestly took ledge fishing by storm more than any other bait. I mean, even the Alabama rig, the Alabama rig doesn't even seem to play as much in the summertime. Like, it's really a cold water, technique. And that's something I would have thought would have really took off, and it never did. But before that tournament started, somebody audited up to me and they were like, "You got a 10-inch spoon?" And I was like, "What?" And they were like, "You got one of those 10-inch spoons?" I said, "I have no idea what the heck you're talking about." He said, "Well, Bethel's going to win, and they're throwing this 10-inch spoon, and that's what they're going to win on." I'm like, "Well, they better freaking catch them because I'm about to." And guess what? They freaking caught them. Like, big ones, lots of them. And no.
In like 7 minutes.
Oh, yeah. No, I know. Well, and the thing about it was
in the last
the
hour
flutter
of the day.
spoon, the flutter spoon and the hair jig were probably the two most dominant baits that have ever been the first thing fired out there. I remember the first person that I ever watched throw a spoon out there, like, it was nuts. They were just immediately jumping on it. And this was during a time frame where we were throwing that on community holes. It wasn't, obviously they didn't have the pressure they do now, but like these fish had seen some baits and that floater spoon just killed them. So, and the hair jig was the same way. First time you ever got a hair jig thrown out there, like, they jumped on it. Fast forward to the time frame where the mag spoon really took off. I think a lot of that had to do with that was a proven action and a proven bait. And these lakes still had huge populations of big fish in them. And really, probably what happened more than anything was that real aggressive large fish was the one that was going to eat that. So, you're throwing a small hair jig, you're throwing a worm, you throw a crankbait, whatever, 2-pounders eat that all day. So you would have to burn through those 2-pounders to get to that 5-pounder, and then you'd catch a bunch more too, and then you'd catch that 6-pounder. When you throw that 10-inch spoon out there, that's the meal that fish is looking for. And I feel like what made that so dominant for a little while was it had the proven action you were looking for, and it culled through a lot of those small ones. They just didn't bite it the same as those big ones would. And, now I still feel like it's just as dominant of a bait. I just don't feel like we have the population of the 5, 6, 7, 8-pounders, as we once did. And the whole population talks a whole, for a whole nother podcast. But I also just feel like those big ones get smarter quicker, and I don't feel like they set up as deep as they once did. Before they were getting idled over a bunch, before everybody was fishing for them a bunch, I felt like you had a group of those older class fish that would get out there in those schools. Nowadays, I seem to find them shallower, more, year round. It's like they transition just be bluegill eaters. They like to get in a brush pile and just be the only one in it. It's kind of their house, and it's where they're gonna hang out at. So, no, there's never been another offshore, strictly offshore bait like the mag spoon. In my opinion, it was pretty revolutionary how good it caught big ones.
It was very cool. I want to apologize and go ahead and say.
Well, I was going to say the only other bait that even was kind of remotely close to being like that would have been a 10XD. And it was out before the spoon, but I feel like the spoon caught more big ones than anything.
Yeah. And just memorable, vicious action, like just how you'd see them load up on that thing. I want to apologize. First off, I got it wrong. It was Dalton Wilson and Randall Morris. Can't believe I forgot Randall. They had 27 or something on day one of that event, and then they'd had nothing until the last 20 minutes of the tournament and catch their 21 pounds to win. I think you and Grant were right there in the mix as well. Cody Harrison as well. Kyle, do you have anything for Justin before we let him go? I could do just a straight Pickwick podcast. I think, Justin, you could make a lot of money doing the Pickwick podcast, and we just tell stories and you just do all that, because it is absolutely one of the most fun places in the summer if we're comparing Tennessee River places.
We've got there's a lot of history to be talked about out here. I'm actually going to go fish a night tournament here in just a minute. So hopefully somebody's on some of them old homes.
Don't fish the offshore spots. Just fish the bank, because they go up there at night. Yeah. I heard.
Well, I can promise you, once that sun starts to set, I'll be up on the bank.
So, last question I have. Speaking of on the bank, there's probably some people listening to this that live, on bodies of water where deep fishing is not really the deal. There's plenty of places. You just got off of a good finish there at the Sabine River. There was no ledge fishing there. You could go there in July and there would be no ledge fishing there.
Correct.
When it comes to staying shallow in the month of June, two-prong question, I guess. One, kind of what are you looking for? Obviously, like, vegetation, maybe shade, whatever it may be. And then two, like, if you had to, give us a rotation of baits for staying shallow, what would you stay with there?
Yeah, so essentially, if I'm going to a fishery that I know offshore is not even going to be a player, you're going to look for vegetation and food. Food source we'll cover first would be such as bluegill. Maybe there's shad on the bank. See if it's a full moon. Maybe there's crawfish feeding. Crawfish spawning. Crawfish being on the bank. one thing to always watch for, and I get made fun of for this one a lot too. I watch for raccoons working down the bank. If you see raccoons working down the bank during the daytime, the crawfish are spawning. Crawfish are on the bank. There's definitely a shallow bite. And the second thing is going to be vegetation, and the reason for that being, using the Sabine River as a prime example, I had a stretch I was fishing every day that I got a lot of bites on. You could just keep rotating through it, and it was literally so shallow. My boat was stirring up mud, and the fish were right up there, on the bank, and these little bits of grass that were growing. Like grass is going to put off oxygen into the water, and so that allows those fish to stay up there that shallow in that 90-degree in that 90-degree water column, because those fish would feel hot when I would catch them and touch them, and they were, that's where they lived. And there was pads out off the bank where the water was 85, 84, and I don't understand why more of them weren't out there, but there was obviously a food source, such as some bluegill, that were up close to the bank, and they had the vegetation that would put out the oxygen. So there's always a recipe to why fish are where they are. You just have to be a quick learner and understand what to possibly be looking for to put it together.
And then bait rotation. Like if you had to pick 3 baits for staying shallow that time of year, obviously popular time of the year for topwaters, things like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. If I was 2 things that I always like to keep handy that both involve the same plastic. Number 1 is going to be a Pit-Boss Junior. Put a 3/0 Berkeley Fusion 19 flipping hook in it, like a 5/16 ounce weight. That gives you enough weight that you can pitch the bait accurately, make quiet pitches, because when they're that shallow, I think being quiet is very critical. You don't want your bait splashing up there on top of them. They're not but 10 or 12 inches deep. They like it just to naturally fall into the water. Second thing, I like to throw a buzz bait and put a Pit-Boss Junior on it. And that allows, me to cut down on tackle in my boat. I can just take a few packs of those. It's a 2-prong approach using the same bait, and that bait works really good. Allows you to skip the buzz bait. It casts really well on it, and get a lot of bites with it. And it imitates a lot of things that are up there. You can get a brim color to put on your buzz bait, or you can throw it in just black and blue. Same goes with pitching. You just pitch a green pumpkin or a black and blue. It's gonna, cover a lot of different things this fish could possibly be up there eating.
Justin, the last thing I got for you, so far this year, sitting okay in points, just still in range of the classic, but 3 cuts made, 3 cuts missed. Now we're going up north, 3 cuts left. You're going to go 3 for 3 on making it on smallmouth, because it seems like the last few years, other than the Tennessee River, somehow an Alabama/Mississippi boy learned how to catch some smallmouth. Maybe you and Brock Mosley got on that train, because he's pretty good at it too.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I like fishing for them. I've always done well finding them, and I do well catching them. Yeah, I'll be disappointed if I don't at least make 350 cuts. I would really like to make 310 cuts. That would be awesome. You said okay in the points. Yeah, it's still disappointing. I know I'm not fishing, to my ability. I don't know. It's such a mental thing, and be honest with you, one thing I've really kind of learned here lately is the Elite Series. We fish a lot of grinder tournaments. We fish a lot of tournaments where you're going to have to trust your instincts that bank's probably got a bite on it, and I need to dedicate an hour to fishing down it. To whereas early in my career, when I got a lot of success, we went to a lot of places where we got a ton of bites. Like, I put the boat in and I'd start getting bites. I would instantly get dialed, and I would know to go from here to here to here. And that's fine and dandy. That's all part of the game, is just knowing, this one's a grinder. I need to fish more like this, and I need to kick it out of gear. I'm wanting to get a lot of bites. I need to practice for 6 bites a day. I need to practice for 7 bites. And so, slowly learning that, I really started trying to apply that at Lake Lake. Turned out good. Really tried to apply that at the Sabine River on day 2. Day 1, I was kind of on a winding bite, and I thought maybe if I caught enough bass that I would catch a good one. And I literally probably caught 50 the first day and had 5 pounds. Second day, I just got my pitching stick out, put the Pit-Boss Junior to work, caught 7 or 8, and had 8 pounds. Third day, my area just got a little bit popular. Guys were running out of fish, kind of started splitting the water up, whatever. that's fine when that happens on day 3. So, going up north though, we're gonna get a lot of bites in those. Those will be power fishing tournaments to where, you're fishing for big smallmouth. They're gonna want to bite when you get around them. You can, you can run around, and if you're catching 3-pounders, it's all right to pull your trolling motor and go somewhere else. Like, you're gonna run in them big ones if you just cover some water. So I'm looking forward to going up there. I got it figured out. I mean, I've got it figured the way it's been going. 3/15 or better, we'll get to make a dream come true. If not, we can just make 350 cuts. We at least won't get kicked off the Elite Series. So
And that's the big
we're
thing
going.
with OK is it's not.
It's
Being
not what
completely
we
honest,
want,
me
but
and
it's not
Kyle, it's not
terrible.
acceptable to what Justin Atkins' ability is. It's one of those things. It's not, you're not Ryan Leaf, but like these number 1 draft picks that don't pan out, you're like, their career would be fine for most, but it's disappointing for their skill level. For you, that's the expectation coming in the elites was set really high, and so we haven't hit that mark yet. But based on where you've been the last few years in points, you're sitting okay, and you're like you said,
Yeah.
staying in the Elite Series. You put a couple tournaments together. It doesn't matter which 6 events you catch them on out of the 9 elites, whether it's the first 6
Yeah.
or the last 6. You catch them in the last 6, you still can make the classic, and so you're not far off the pace there. Kyle, you got anything for Justin before we let him go? I mean, I could talk all day.
I do not. Ironically, he and I had the same conversation on day 3 on the at the Sabine River. But I told him, I said, how many top 10s are we rattling off the last 3? Because I feel like they all set up so well for you, which is one of those things, like we were saying, is so crazy because there seems to be like a weird mixture of like Southern guys that do really well smallmouth fishing, like Justin being one of those, like just like money smallmouth fishing, and then there's some guys that I feel like would just assume never make a cast for a smallmouth. So I'm excited to see what Justin Atkins can do. Of course, on the last 3 events, and I would suspect some extremely good finishes, and hopefully I'll be right there to watch you do it.
I hope so, buddy.
Yeah, that would be great. Justin, appreciate you joining us on the Inside Bassmaster Podcast presented by Black Rifle Coffee Company. This was the pattern of the month for June. If you want to learn more about ledge fishing, rewind this video because it was absolutely full of goodness and some fun stories along the way. Justin, appreciate you, bro, and we will see you at the end of July for the next stop of the Bassmaster Elite Series at St. Clair.
Thanks for having me, guys.